The green, flaming skull, Voldemort's lingering soul, let out a silent roar as it streaked toward Jason, dragging a long, dark green tail of fire. It expanded as it flew. By the time it reached him, it had grown enormous, blotting out a large swath of the night sky. A dense, hateful aura pressed down on them, the air growing stagnant and suffocating. Inside the lightning shield, Harry, Ron, Hermione, Neville, and a waking, headache-racked Malfoy were utterly frozen, their minds blank. They stared up at the colossal skull, pupils pinpricks of terror, bodies rigid and unable to move. It was all they could think. It's over. Could Jason possibly stop something like that? The great thunder dragon that had been circling him, its lightning-bright eyes like spheres on a fearsome head, gave a contemptuous flash and did not bother to study the skull. It made no unnecessary movement. With a low, detached sound, it lifted its massive head and opened its jaws toward the surging green apparition. An invisible, terrible suction erupted. Air rushed inward in a visible vortex. The flaming skull, helpless before the pull, was dragged toward the dragon's gaping maw, its shape buckling and twisting in midair as a high, keening shriek tore from it. Voldemort's resentful, terrified cry began and was cut off as the skull was sucked down and swallowed in one gulp. The thunder dragon's throat worked with a muffled sound, and then the dragon's belly erupted in a series of electrical flashes. Purple-blue light pulsed beneath its scales, sparks danced along its flanks before subsiding. A few breaths later, the storm inside it was over. The once legendary Dark Lord, whose name had made the wizarding world tremble for decades, was gone. His last remaining soul, clinging to Quirrell, had been dispensed with in an instant. The evil chill in the air evaporated. The thundercloud still churned, but the malice that had hung over the Forbidden Forest was gone. The atmosphere felt cleaner, the night quieter. Jason, hovering in midair, registered a small boredom. He had set the stage with the Sea of Thunder and the Lightning Cage for a long time, only for the final act to be so effortless. A remnant soul barely able to cling to another had been too weak to be any real challenge. If he had known it would be this simple, he might have used a few arcane missiles and been done with Quirrell entirely. Still, solving such a problem so neatly was hardly a loss. He waved his hand. The thunder dragon answered with a low roar and dissolved into a writhing mass of electric snakes that plunged down to rejoin the Sea of Thunder. The area of destructive lightning quickly faded. The violent elemental energy calmed and revealed the blackened, pitted earth beneath. The great lightning cage dimmed into motes of electric light and scattered into the air. The purple-blue storm clouds drained of their peculiar color and returned to ordinary dark clouds, minus the lightning. The mood in the Forbidden Forest eased from the tension and ruin of moments before, though the scent of ozone and faint smoke lingered. With the thunder prison gone, the distant beams of the professors were no longer impeded. Light streaked across the grounds as they hurried in. Professor McGonagall led the way, stumbling with anxiety as she landed and braced herself on her wand. She looked pale as she took in the devastation. Snape followed closely, his habitual reserve replaced by a complex, unreadable expression as his gaze swept the ruined clearing and came to rest on the figure descending from the sky. Professor Flitwick and Professor Sprout arrived as well, relief and shock written across their faces at the damage. The instant the inner lightning shield collapsed, Harry, Ron, Hermione, Neville, and Malfoy dropped to the ground as though their legs had been cut out from beneath them, gasping for breath. The brief, endless-seeming moment of terror had left them physically spent. Harry's lightning-shaped scar still throbbed faintly, but the burning pain that had haunted him for 10 years was gone. He pressed a hand to his forehead, bewildered and relieved by the sudden, crushing exhaustion. Jason descended slowly. The golden magical glow that had surrounded him faded, revealing his familiar look, immaculate wizard's robes and impeccably neat hair in stark contrast to the shattered battlefield below. His eyes swept over the collapsed students and professors before settling on Hagrid, who was struggling to his feet. The gamekeeper's hands were blackened and charred from forcing his way through the lightning cage. They smoked and gave off the acrid smell of burned flesh. "Hagrid, don't move," Jason said, stepping in front of him. The half-giant could not meet his gaze. He only dropped his head and muttered, staring at his ruined palms. Jason extended his hand. a soft green light condensed in his palm, vitality made visible. "Rapid healing," he said. The healing magic was far stronger than an ordinary charm. It flowed over Hagrid's hands, and a visible miracle took place. The dead, charred tissue peeled away, and new flesh grew in its place, knitting and smoothing with astonishing speed. In a few breaths, the grotesque damage was gone. Hagrid's huge hands were whole again, healthier even than before, without a single scar. Hagrid lifted his hands and stared at them in disbelieving bewilderment, bending his wrists as if to test them. His face was a picture of confusion. The pain was gone, completely gone, and a long, dormant strength had returned to his limbs. Hagrid knew his half-giant blood made him unusually resistant to magic, and that ordinary healing charms did little for him. After those electrical burns, he had expected to be in the hospital wing for weeks. Instead, he stood there, whole. The professors and the students who had been struggling to sit up merely watched, stunned. Their thoughts seemed to freeze. What else could this young man not do? Earlier, the lightning had been pure destruction. Now this silent, perfect healing revealed a different sort of power, one that inspired equal awe. Professor McGonagall opened her mouth as if to ask about the strange magic or about the student's condition, but no words came out. Snape's gaze went far deeper. He stared at Jason, then across to where Quirrell had been reduced to ash, his brow knitting in concentration. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had almost stopped thinking altogether. From Jason glowing, to lightning tearing through the forest, to a dragon of electricity devouring a shadow, to this impossible healing, tonight's events were weirder than anything they had lived through in the last 11 years. Their brains had given up. They simply stared at Jason, this stranger with a familiar face. "So healing spells can be used like that?" Ron whispered, voice barely audible. Hermione's eyes, however, shone with an almost feverish curiosity. If the setting had been different, she would have taken out a notebook and written down each movement of Jason's casting. This extreme application of magic seized her completely. Malfoy had crawled into a corner and tried to make himself as small as possible. His contempt had curdled into fear. He knew his earlier taunts must look childish now, and the fear only fed his appetite for power. Jason withdrew his hand, looked at the frozen faces around him, and let out a soft chuckle that finally broke the silence. "All right," he said, easy as if he'd just swatted a fly. "I think the trouble here is resolved. Professors, the cleanup is up to you." He sounded almost casual about things that had involved the Dark Lord's remnant soul. Later, in the headmaster's office, the fire in the hearth popped and crackled, throwing golden light over the portraits of past headmasters. Some leaned forward, eyes bright with curiosity. A few looked solemn. Others pretended to sleep. The faint smell of ozone still hung in the air, a trace of Jason's magic. Dumbledore sat behind the great desk, fingers laced. His blue eyes peered over his half-moon spectacles, taking in the students who had not yet fully recovered, and lingering on Jason with a steady, appraising gaze. Amid the parchment and humming silver instruments on the desk, there were plates of colorful sweets, including a dish labeled cockroach clusters. "Children," Dumbledore began, breaking the hush, "we must have a long conversation about tonight." Then he gave a small, genial smile. "But would you like to try some cockroach clusters first? They have been known to calm the nerves." He winked kindly. Ron went pale at the name, stomach lurching. He recoiled instinctively. Harry and Hermione exchanged uncomfortable looks and declined. Jason, however, didn't seem to care. He plucked one up, popped it into his mouth, and made a crisp chewing sound. "Tastes good, Headmaster," he observed. "The texture is unique." There was the faintest flicker of amusement in Dumbledore's eyes before his expression turned serious. "Professor McGonagall has sent the prefects to check on the other students. Jason, your little episode tonight was considerable." The old man rubbed his forehead and, with a touch of helplessness, added, "That lightning, I dare say half of Hogsmeade saw it. The night sky was lit up. My old bones cannot take such reckless behavior from you young people." Harry and Ron began to recount their part of the evening in the Forbidden Forest. Hermione filled in gaps. They spoke haltingly. The acromantula, Quirrell's appearance and that name, Jason suddenly glowing, the summoning of lightning, and the dragon that devoured the Dark Lord's remnant. Even though the professors had seen parts of the scene and received reports, hearing the full story made McGonagall, Snape, Flitwick, and Sprout visibly uneasy. Snape's usually unreadable face tightened at the corners of his mouth as he looked Jason up and down, as if trying to see something beneath the surface. "Such command of magic," Professor Flitwick said, his voice high and slightly unsteady as he adjusted his pointy hat. "Such destructive scope. Dumbledore, with all due respect, is this the work of a first year? Even Voldemort at his height could not have produced something much grander." McGonagall's brows drew together, and she spoke with grave severity. "More to the point, Avada Kedavra, Mr. Lester. How did you stop it?" Jason offered a calm smile. "I used some defensive runes, Professor. They happen to counter that kind of killing curse. As I mentioned earlier, I've been researching runes linked to mental power. These are derivatives." Snape's mouth became a thin, contemptuous line. "Defensive runic techniques, Mr. Lester. Your so-called specials never fail to redefine the possible," he sneered. Dumbledore raised a hand to still him. "Severus, now is not the time to quarrel over phrasing." He continued more gently. "The fact remains, Mr. Lester prevented a disaster that might have swept the wizarding world, though I admit the methods were, shall we say, extremely attention-grabbing." "Attention-grabbing?" McGonagall's voice rose. Her face, still taut from the night's terror, flushed with anger. "Albus, this was not mere attention-seeking. This was a grave breach of conduct during detention. He engaged in combat with dangerous individuals without authorization and used that energy that nearly destroyed half the Forbidden Forest. What reckless danger did he put the other 4 students in?" She turned on Jason, her stern gaze blazing. "Mr. Lester, the school has professors whose job it is to deal with danger. When you are confronted with peril, you seek help. You do not act alone." "Minerva, calm down," Dumbledore said in time, but Professor McGonagall was clearly beyond calming. "I am calm, Albus," she snapped. "By school rules, acting so recklessly while on detention and using such dangerous, unknown magic is grounds for expulsion, especially Mr. Lester, the power he showed. If that's left unchecked, who can guarantee he won't become the next Dark Lord?" She forced out the last words, and the office went icy. Harry, Ron, and Hermione went pale. They wanted to defend Jason, but under McGonagall's fierce presence, they could not find a single word. Snape's lips curved in a cold little smile. He said nothing, but the approval in his eyes was obvious. "Professor, you're right, I did break school rules," Jason admitted at that tense moment, "but I have a few questions." He met McGonagall's glare. "First, when we were surrounded by hundreds of acromantulas, where were the professors? Second, when Professor Quirrell, a member of the staff, revealed himself as being possessed by Lord Voldemort, who were we supposed to turn to for help? Third, when he attacked me with the killing curse, was I supposed to stand there and wait for the professors to save me?" The sequence of rhetorical questions left McGonagall for once without an answer. Her face went from red to white as she opened her mouth. "Aye. As for destroying half the Forbidden Forest," Jason continued, his gaze sweeping the room, "if that had not been done, professors, do you think you would be facing a lingering remnant of Voldemort's soul, or a Lord Voldemort who had reclaimed the Philosopher's Stone and regained much of his power?" His cold tone settled over everyone like a weight. The office was deathly silent. Professor Sprout shifted and whispered, "But that scene was terrifying." "So what we're discussing now," Jason said, spreading his hands with a wry smile, "is punishing a student who may have saved the school and perhaps the entire wizarding world simply because he didn't follow procedure." He looked utterly unconcerned, which made Snape's expression grow even darker. "Arrogant," Snape barked. "Dumbledore, did you hear that? This is the student you favor, disrespectful to his elders, contemptuous of rules. Today he can destroy the Forbidden Forest to save the school. Tomorrow he might raze Hogwarts to the ground in the name of his so-called justice." "Severus," Dumbledore's voice deepened. For the first time, the old smile left his face, and a sharp glint took its place. "Enough." Snape's lips moved, but he closed them at last, chest heaving. Dumbledore turned his gaze back to Jason, looking as if he could see right through him. The air in the office crackled with tension. Harry's palms were sweating. He felt the moment of fate had come. After a long silence, Dumbledore spoke slowly. First, although you entered the Forbidden Forest as a punishment, when faced with danger, you did not immediately withdraw and seek a professor's help. Instead, you acted on your own, recklessly, putting yourselves and your classmates at risk. For this, Gryffindor and Slytherin will each lose 50 points. McGonagall's frown deepened. She clearly thought the punishment too light. Snape snorted coldly. Secondly, Dumbledore went on, Mr. Lester used magic during the battle that was excessively powerful and far too wide in scope, damaging large parts of the Forbidden Forest and causing an adverse effect on the school. For that, Gryffindor will lose another 100 points. What? Ron cried. 150 points. That was colossal. The House Cup would now be out of reach. Harry and Hermione went ashen. McGonagall's expression softened. This felt like an appropriate reprimand. But Dumbledore did not finish. The serious look fell away, and his familiar, cunning smile returned. But he allowed the pause to stretch, considering that Mr. Lester, with exceptional judgment and unmatched courage, confronted and defeated the great threat within the school, unmasked Professor Quirrell, and successfully destroyed a remnant of Lord Voldemort's soul, thereby averting a catastrophe. Dumbledore's voice rang through the office. I have decided to award Gryffindor 200 points in recognition of this unprecedented and outstanding contribution to the school and the wizarding world. Then he added, looking toward Draco, as for Mr. Malfoy. He glanced at Draco, who was still dazed in the corner, and continued, given that your motives at first were not entirely pure, but that you did not ultimately worsen the situation and have been profoundly chastened by the experience, Slytherin shall neither lose nor gain points this time. What do you think, Draco? Malfoy, as if newly pardoned, hastily bowed. Yes, Headmaster, I completely agree. Very fair. All at once, time seemed to stop in the office. Harry, Ron, and Hermione's mouths hung open. Their expressions cascaded from despair to stupefaction to joy so quickly their faces twitched. 200 points added? After 150 taken away, that still left a net gain of 50 points. Albus, you can't do this. McGonagall practically stood incredulous. Dumbledore winked cheerfully at Snape, whose already gloomy face had gone livid. He rose and walked over to Jason, laying a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. My boy, you did very well, he said softly. But power needs guidance, and above all, responsibility. We will need to speak at length about tonight's events, alone, about runes, about the future, about many things. Jason looked at the wise old man and smiled slightly. He nodded. Everything, it seemed, was under control. Inside the Gryffindor common room, the fire burned bright, lighting up a dozen excited faces. It was late, but the flashes of lightning and the distant roars that had come from the Forbidden Forest earlier kept many of the younger Gryffindors awake, clustered in small groups and talking fast. When 4 figures appeared on the stairs leading to the dormitories, the chatter died instantly and dozens of eyes turned toward them. Oi, finally back, someone shouted. Fred and George Weasley shoved through the crowd and planted themselves on either side of Jason and Harry. We knew that fuss outside had to do with you lot, especially you, Jason, Gryffindor's rising star. Fred arched an eyebrow, letting his gaze sweep over the 4 before settling on Jason. George gave a conspiratorial wink. Come on, tell us everything. Did you get into another proper adventure? Don't worry, our lips are sealed. Jason smiled. You might find out in tomorrow's Daily Prophet. Oh, come off it, Jason. The paper never makes it sound as good as the real thing. Tell us now. At worst, you get to test our new auto-correcting quill, Flattery Edition, first. Fred clutched his chest in mock solemnity. And my sceving snack boxes will create just the sort of chaos you need to make a clean getaway, George added, refusing to be outdone. Harry watched the twins with a swirling frustration inside him that hadn't settled. He drew a breath, looked at Jason with a seriousness that surprised everyone, and said, Jason, tonight He searched for the words, then spoke with quiet determination. I want to get stronger, as strong as you. Having seen the power Jason had wielded, lightning bent to his will, and a thunder dragon that had smashed what was left of Voldemort's remnant, Harry's whole idea of strength had shifted. If he had that kind of power, could he protect the people he cared about? Would he still feel helpless against enemies lurking in the dark? Ron beside him nodded so hard his hair ruffled. He was still pale from shock, but more than anything else, there was hunger in his eyes. He didn't share Harry's sense of destiny, but Jason's destructive power excited him. Hermione frowned and looked at Jason, worry creasing her brow. Jason, isn't that dangerous? If the dark wizards find out about you. Her concern was genuine. Dumbledore's cautions were not baseless. Jason patted Harry's shoulder and gave Hermione a reassuring smile. Don't worry, Hermione. The ones who should be worried are the short-sighted dark wizards. He paused, then said in a relaxed, confident tone, the magical world is still a beginner's zone for me. I might not be the strongest yet, but dealing with a few hidden figures is nothing. Beginner's zone? Fred and George exchanged a look, puzzled but intrigued. The phrase sounded fresh and exciting. Jason continued, don't be in too much of a hurry. Wanting power is good, but you need a solid foundation. I can teach you some practical spells and the basics, starting from square one if we have to. Teach us? Harry and Ron lit up instantly. We want in. Night adventures are the best, the twins chorused, practically vibrating with anticipation. Jason smiled. All right, but you have to follow the rules. It's late tonight. Everyone head to bed and get some rest. We'll set a time and go over the details later. After shepherding the still buzzing twins and the rest of the curious Gryffindors away, the four returned to their dormitories. Jason lay on his four-poster and didn't drift off right away. He replayed the battle. Quirrell's killing curse aimed at him, Voldemort's remnant throwing itself into a last attack, and the thunder dragon he'd summoned to tear it apart. Still too weak, he whispered. A translucent panel shimmered into being before his eyes, runes and numbers flowing across it. Name Jason Lester rank, First Order Arcanist, experience 85%. Mental power, 85 mana, 850, mental power x10. Arcane disciplines mastered, evocation, lightning specialization, abjuration, conjuration, beginner. Arcane skills, summon thunder dragon, First Order limit, arcane missiles, storm, First Order, runic shield, master level. Talents, memory palace, soul talent, dexterous hands, soul talent, exceptional comprehension, soul talent. I'm almost Second Order, he muttered, watching the experience bar hover just below the next threshold. If he reached Second Order, his spells would be stronger, his repertoire larger, and both his mental power and mana would swell. He pictured standing against Voldemort's true body with confidence rather than fear. That thought steadied him. Another idea rose, enormous and gleaming. Build a floating city and conquer other worlds. A mobile fortress of arcane technology and magic, a sky city for hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people. Impenetrable defenses, comfortable living quarters, and the most advanced magical research center. The plan thrilled him, then sobered him. It was vast beyond imagining. Even with the arcane codex at his disposal, a project on that scale would need legions of skilled workers, material collectors, rune carvers, energy core engineers, urban planners, specialists for every step, and money, vast sums of money. The British wizarding population was small. The world's economy could barely support something of that magnitude. It seems I'll have to take it step by step, Jason said aloud, rubbing his temples. First, get stronger. Second Order, then higher, as fast as possible. Second, raise initial capital, maybe by exploring ancient ruins or hunting lost magical treasures. Third, assemble a team, reliable people, and technical experts. The floating city was distant, but not impossible. The next steps he laid out were the starting point. Night deepened. Jason closed his eyes, letting his consciousness sink into meditation, regaining the mental power he had spent and beginning to deduce several new arcane models in his mind. Early the next morning, the stained glass windows of the Gryffindor common room cut the sunlight into shifting patches of color. The air was full of the smell of toast and the sharp tang of fresh ink from the Daily Prophet, carried in by early rising students. As everyone expected, the paper's front page bore a large, bold headline, Thunderclap in Hogwarts Forbidden Forest last night. Mysterious power levels Acromantula Lair. Ministry of Magic launches investigation. The subheadline was even more tantalizing. Eyewitnesses claim lightning pierced the sky, possibly connected to a rising star about to be honored. The article quoted an anonymous source at the Auror office and described a wide area deep in the Forbidden Forest devastated by powerful elemental magic. The ground had been blackened and split, soil and rock overturned as if by violent force. Dozens of adult acromantula corpses lay everywhere, gruesomely slain. The report said most of the giant spiders appeared to have died from lightning and intense cold. On some of the carcasses, however, examiners had found unusual soil residue, soil that looked like it had been crushed, mixed with rock. Wow, my bit made it into the paper. Earth and stone crushing. That was my earth spike technique, all right? Ron exclaimed through a mouthful of chicken, his face alight with excitement. Finally, he too could claim a place in the headlines, even if only as a leftover effect. Dumbledore had given Gryffindor 250 points the night before. Added to the 50 they'd already earned, the rubies in the house points hourglass had surged so high they almost overflowed. Harry said nothing, just nodded. The newspaper's description of lightning and frost had reminded him again of Jason summoning the Thunder Dragon. Lightning that came down from the sky and consumed everything. The words in the article barely scratched the surface of what he had seen. Hermione frowned. They didn't name anyone, but everyone knows who the rising star about to be honored is. Didn't Headmaster Dumbledore tell them to handle this discreetly? When has the Daily Prophet ever told the truth? Fred appeared as if from nowhere, a piece of parchment dangling from his fingers. They love this kind of speculation. Mystery sells. Besides, George added, waving his own sheet, rumors about Gryffindor are everywhere. They're saying our house produced a genius on Merlin's level, and that last night's commotion was him protecting his classmates and casually taking out the spider nest. Recipient of an Order of Merlin, first class, the pride of Gryffindor, Lee Jordan shouted. You should have seen those Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs looking at us this morning. Utter admiration. At breakfast, the mood in the Great Hall was peculiar. Students from other houses, especially those fascinated by strong magic, hovered near the Gryffindor table, trying to get close enough to learn something about Jason. But they were quickly rebuffed. Fred and George had organized a human barricade, and the Gryffindors clustered protectively around Jason, blocking anyone who tried to approach. Want to interview our Jason? Fine. But first, answer 3 questions about the future development of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. Get them right and win a prize. Fred grinned. Or demonstrate right now how to annoy Filch in 1 minute and get away, and maybe then we'll let you ask Jason 3 sentences, George added. Those turned away could only glare, annoyed and amused at once. The Gryffindors laughed, their pride and their suddenly swollen house points binding them together more tightly than before. Jason smiled quietly and ate his breakfast. He felt, after last night, that Harry, Ron, and Hermione looked at him with something beyond friendship, more admiration and trust. That afternoon, the sun was warm when Jason arrived at the headmaster's office at the appointed time. Dumbledore sat behind his cluttered desk, various oddities piled around him and a plate of still bubbling cockroach clusters nearby. He greeted Jason with a smile. Sit, Jason. The Ministry has arranged everything for the Order of Merlin award ceremony this afternoon. Minister Fudge is very eager to meet you, the future light of the magical world, Dumbledore said, motioning to the chair. Professor Snape stood in a corner of the office, arms folded, staring out the window with the expression of someone thoroughly displeased. When Dumbledore mentioned the ceremony, Snape let out an almost inaudible snort. Professor Snape will accompany us, Dumbledore continued, apparently oblivious to Snape's mood. There will likely be many reporters today. With Severus there, he can at least help you fend off unnecessary troubles, especially those Daily Prophet types who want to dig for a story. Snape turned his dark eyes on Jason and said in his trademark drawl, Just don't let some overly smug little show-off dismantle the Ministry on the podium. Jason smiled faintly. Then I'll have to rely on Professor Snape. I can control my magic in a non-combat state, though. Dumbledore chuckled, popped a cockroach cluster into his mouth and chewed. You read the paper, I suppose? It's exaggerated, but that saves us the trouble of explaining. At least they focused on mysterious power and acromantula rather than what you actually did, so you won't attract too much attention. They seem very interested in the soil residue, Jason observed. Oh, that, Dumbledore said lightly. Aurors have to put something in their reports to show they're being thorough. A little mystery is often more useful than a full explanation. It hides what matters. He grew a touch more serious. This afternoon's ceremony is an honor and your first public appearance. Many people will be watching you, not only the ministry, but some who prefer to lurk in the shadows. Dumbledore winked. Understood, Headmaster. I'll be careful, Jason replied. Chapter 66. The youngest medal recipient in history. Excellent. Remember, keep smiling, speak modestly, and show proper composure. Leave the difficult questions to me. You just need to enjoy your moment in the spotlight. Dumbledore rose from his chair. It's time. We should be going. Minister Fudge dislikes waiting, especially when he thinks he's the main character. Snape followed reluctantly, and as he passed Jason, he spoke in that same drawling tone of his. Don't imagine that getting a medal lets you do whatever you like, Lester. Hogwarts rules apply to every student. Jason turned his head and offered a perfectly polite smile. Of course, Professor. I will remember your lessons. The three of them left the headmaster's office and prepared to travel to the ministry by flu. An award ceremony would begin in a few hours, and every eye in the wizarding world would be on an 11-year-old already being hailed as remarkable. Green flames spurted up inside the ministry's great fireplace, then died down. Dumbledore emerged first from the cloud of flu smoke, automatically brushing non-existent dust from his robes. Jason came out next, taking in the atrium of the Ministry of Magic, the center of British wizarding power, with a curious, alert gaze. Dark wood rose up around them, inlaid with glittering gold runes. A peacock blue ceiling also bore moving golden designs. The air smelled of old parchment and floor wax, crossed with an undercurrent of tight nerves. Witches and wizards in robes hurried between the entrances to the different departments, enchanted messages darting like paper planes overhead. Snape was last out of the fire. As he steadied himself, his expression hardened. He clearly disliked being anywhere near the ministry. "Ah, Albus, you're punctual at last," called a slightly high, overly warm voice. Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic, waddled forward with his usual beaming expression. His pinstriped robe was well cut, his bowler hat slightly cocked, lending him a comic air. He paused to admire Dumbledore a moment before turning eagerly to Jason. "This must be Mr. Jason Lester. Merlin's beard, what a hero, and so young. He looks even more spirited than in the papers. A wonderful young wizard." Fudge grasped Jason's hand in a stout, enthusiastic shake, pumping it as if he could draw some of the boy's luck into himself. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Minister," Jason said, subtly withdrawing his hand. "Thank you." "Oh, I'm delighted, truly delighted. Mr. Lester, you are the pride of our community. I've heard some of what happened in the Forbidden Forest last night. Astounding." Fudge's eyes shone. His voice oozed exaggerated admiration. "Such power and spectacle. The ministry will investigate thoroughly and give you a full report, rest assured." Dumbledore smiled at the sight of it, something like understanding in his eyes. Fudge seemed oblivious to Snape's cold look. He leaned in conspiratorially, though his whispered tone was still loud enough for people nearby to hear. "Mr. Lester, about the details of last night and your unique magical techniques, I'm very interested. After the awards, might we speak privately? The ministry would be more than willing to offer support and sponsorship to a talent like yours. We're generous with funding, you understand." His tone left nothing to the imagination. He wanted whatever secret advantage Jason might hold. Jason inwardly sneered. He saw through the calculation plainly. It was an attempt to trade patronage for access to knowledge, arcane runic methods that could transcend ordinary limits. "Thank you for the offer, Minister, but I don't need sponsorship at the moment," Jason said, keeping his smile steady. "As for my techniques, they're the result of personal study and aren't suitable for general distribution." The refusal stiffened Fudge's smile. For a flicker of a moment, displeasure crossed his features before he recovered his official geniality. "Aha! Modest, too. No matter. There'll be time to talk later." Jason thought, if people knew he possessed runic methods capable of resisting or even countering Avada Kedavra, the whole wizarding world would be shaken. It wouldn't be just opportunistic politicians knocking. Scholars, dark hunters, desperate families, all would come. Loyalty crumbled before absolute power. Few could resist the temptation to break their own limits. If anyone were to inherit his work, it would have to be someone he personally recognized and who swore a soul-binding oath. Otherwise, not a chance. "It's time, Cornelius. The guests and reporters have been waiting, Dumbledore reminded him with a light touch, dissipating the awkwardness. Oh, yes, of course. Albus is right. The ceremony's about to start. Mr. Lester, please come this way. Today you are our star. Fudge straightened his hat and hurried on, his eagerness drawing a faint, almost imperceptible curl from Snape's lip. They threaded through ornate corridors into a vast hall. The ministry's great hall was already packed. A raised platform at the front was decorated with flowers and ministry banners. Below, a sea of robes and expectant faces turned toward the entrance. Reporters clustered nearest the aisle, cameras ready and quick quills poised, all eyes sharp and hungry. The moment Fudge led Dumbledore, Snape, and Jason in, camera flashes erupted in a blinding shower, and the click of shutters filled the air. "It's Lester! He's here! He's so handsome!" someone cried. "Oh my goodness, he's really that young? I just want to hug him!" someone else gushed. All around, the chatter swelled as the youngest medal recipient in history stepped into the light. 67. Prelude to a New Era. Look, Dumbledore and Professor Snape are here too. The crowd of reporters stirred, everyone jostling to edge closer. Minister Fudge basked in being the center of attention. He puffed out his round belly, raised a hand to quiet the press, and an official in formal ministry robes stepped forward onto the platform, cleared his throat, and began the ceremony. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Order of Merlin ceremony." The host's voice, amplified by enchantment, carried to every corner of the great hall. "Today we will witness an extraordinary moment. The Ministry of Magic will bestow one of the highest honors in our world, the Order of Merlin, First Class, upon a wizard who is only 11 years old." Applause and shocked gasps erupted. An 11-year-old receiving a first-class Order of Merlin was unprecedented in the history of magic. The host went on, breathless, listing Jason's achievements, inventing new potions, improving old spells, and displaying astonishing academic talent. He glossed over the battle in the Forbidden Forest the previous night, framing it as proof of courage and wisdom beyond his years, and crediting Jason with helping Hogwarts avert a major crisis. Jason stood to the side of the stage, his face unreadable. He felt a dozen kinds of scrutiny: curiosity, appraisal, envy, and an almost avaricious hunger. Now, with our warmest applause, let us invite today's protagonist, the new star of our magical world, recipient of the Order of Merlin, First Class, Mr. Jason Lester, to the stage. Applause swelled again as Jason stepped into the glare of flashbulbs. The sudden brightness made his eyes sting. Camera shutters clicked without pause. Reporters trained their lenses on him, hunting for the smallest expression to supply the next day's headlines. Minister Fudge beamed and personally pinned the heavy, purple glowing medal to Jason's robe. The ribbon was green, Slytherin green, Merlin's house, despite Jason being in Gryffindor. Whether a clerical error or an intentional hint that Jason's potential transcended house lines, the choice made a stir. "Mr. Jason Lester," Fudge intoned, voice thick with pride, "in recognition of your outstanding contributions to the magical world and your unparalleled talent, the Ministry of Magic awards you the Order of Merlin, First Class. May your light illuminate the future of the magical world." The applause continued. Jason took the microphone, his gaze sweeping the assembled faces. For the moment, he was more than a first year at Hogwarts. He was a legend thrust into the public eye. His voice carried magically throughout the hall. "Thank you to the Ministry of Magic, thank you, Minister Fudge, and thank you, Headmaster Dumbledore, and everyone who supported me." His opening remarks were conventional, but what he said next hushed the great hall. "We live in an era where magic seems to have reached its peak. Ancient traditions and powerful spells make up the world we are proud of," he said, staring ahead. "But if magic stops innovating, if we grow complacent and rest on the achievements of our predecessors, then perhaps it will be we, the wizards, who are left behind." A murmur of protest swept from the benches. To wizards raised on tradition and reverence for ancient powers, such words were dangerously bold. The history of magic is a history of continuous exploration and progress. From the early sages who probed natural forces, to Merlin who organized knowledge, to everything we possess today, each generation has built on those that came before. We should not be mere inheritors of knowledge. We should be pioneers of a new era. He looked over the crowd, over the faces that would either walk that path with him or oppose it. My small experiments are only a step forward, standing on the work of those who came before. I believe magic's potential is far from exhausted. There is a wider world awaiting us." As soon as he fell silent, a reporter called out from the press pit. "Mr. Lester, there are rumors the anomaly in the Forbidden Forest last night involved you. Can you give any details? Does that force represent a completely new magic system?" Jason's gaze turned to the questioner. "Regarding the Forbidden Forest, I can only say I was a witness. What I saw was indeed astonishing, perhaps a harbinger of a new era. Who can say?" He didn't directly claim involvement, but he left the imagination open. A second reporter, thick-lensed and skeptical, adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Lester, your remarks were remarkably mature, but with all due respect, can such thoughts truly come from an 11-year-old first year? Did you really arrive at them on your own?" The question implied guidance or undeserved credit. Snape snorted from the staff table. Fudge's smile tightened. Only Dumbledore watched with that amused, gentle smile that seemed to welcome how Jason would respond. Jason's expression didn't change. He cocked his head slightly and replied, "Are you a genius?" The reporter faltered, then shook his head. "No, I'm not." "Well," Jason said with a small, knowing nod, "if you're not a genius, how can you claim to understand a genius? Trying to judge genius by ordinary standards, that itself isn't very ordinary, is it?" Someone in the crowd couldn't help bursting into laughter. The reporter went bright red, mouth opening on a retort he couldn't make. The boy's tongue had been too sharp, too quick for someone so young. The tension in the hall eased as good-natured laughter spread. Newspapers would be lining up for the next day's front pages. Today was already being noted in the annals of the history of magic. 68. The concept of a floating city. After the ceremony, an elderly wizard with a scholarly air stood and asked crisply, "Mr. Lester, do you truly believe there is an upper limit to a wizard's magic? Is there any hope of breaking through such an innate boundary?" The question was pointed and struck a chord with many of the senior wizards in the room. Jason's expression grew more serious. "I don't think the true limit lies in magic itself," he replied. "It lies in the body and spirit of the wizard who wields it. In theory, with a suitably resilient vessel and the right methods of guidance, magic can unleash immeasurable power." His words caused an immediate stir. They suggested a possibility many had longed for, that a wizard's limits might be overcome. Reporters reached for follow-ups, but Dumbledore rose and stepped to Jason's side. "All right, everyone," he said. "I think Jason has answered enough questions for today. He is still only a child, and excessive attention isn't good for him. Today's award ceremony recognizes his talent and effort and expresses our expectation for his future. Let's give him space to study and grow." Minister Fudge hastened to smooth things over. "Yes, yes. Headmaster Dumbledore is right. Q&A is over. Now, once again, a warm round of applause for Mr. Jason Lester." Thunderous applause filled the hall. At Fudge's suggestion, Jason, Dumbledore, Snape, and several high-ranking ministry officials posed for photographs. Fudge stood unnaturally close to Jason, grinning as if he himself had been granted the Order of Merlin, first class. Snape remained his usual implacable self, betraying only a slight stiffening when the photographer asked him to move closer. The ceremony wound down in that warm, slightly awkward atmosphere. Back in the headmaster's office at Hogwarts, the fire in the hearth crackled. Jason sat across from Dumbledore's desk, idly tossing the heavy Order of Merlin, first class, in his hand. Its purple glow traced faint arcs in the firelight. Dumbledore watched him with a pleased, curious smile. Snape stood by the window in his customary stern pose, listening more than he looked like it. Dumbledore picked up a sizzling cockroach cluster and asked, "How do you feel, our youngest recipient of the Order of Merlin?" "Not bad," Jason said, steadying the medal in his palm. "The reporters were more persistent than I expected. The Daily Prophet always has a keen nose for big stories, but you handled it very well, Headmaster. Your words carried weight." Dumbledore chuckled. Then Jason grew serious. "Headmaster, what I said at the ceremony wasn't just talk. I really have an idea about innovating magic and its future." Dumbledore's eyes lit. "Oh? Do tell." Jason set the Order of Merlin on the desk and leaned forward. "Headmaster, imagine a city that floats in the sky, armed with defenses far superior to any current castle, free to move. housing the most advanced magical research facilities and the most comfortable living conditions. What would such a thing mean for the wizarding world? Dumbledore's surprise was obvious. He set the cockroach cluster aside and fixed Jason with an intent look. Even Snape, usually so reserved, turned his head. "A floating city?" Dumbledore repeated, incredulity giving way to a keen interest. The idea had unsettled him in a way very few things did. He had lived over a century and heard countless grand concepts, but elevating an entire city into the sky, especially suggested by an 11-year-old, was unlike anything he'd encountered. "Jason, do you know how much power would be required to make a city, even a small town, float? It would be akin to achieving perpetual anti-gravity. Wizards in the past toyed with the idea of floating castles. Hogwarts itself once entertained similar notions, but they were abandoned when insurmountable obstacles appeared." "And that was a single castle," Dumbledore said cautiously. Jason seemed to have anticipated that reaction. He spun the Order of Merlin between his fingers. Its purple light shimmered in the fireplace glow. "Just because it couldn't be done before doesn't mean it can't be done now, or never," he said evenly. "Muggles once thought flight belonged to the gods, and now their machines cross continents and have even landed on the moon. We wizards possess a more direct, more fundamental power. Why should we remain bound by past limitations?" A low, mocking voice came from the window. Snape had turned fully now, his dark eyes fixed on Jason and a thin sneer on his lips. "A city flying? Delusion," he said. "You should sleep during the day if you think this at night." Snape's contempt was blunt and cruel. He continued without softening his tone. "Even if, by some imaginative stretch, you found a way to levitate stone, this is hardly something a first year could accomplish. Do you know how many galleons it would cost to build a city? Enough to empty Gringotts. What about the tens of thousands of people needed for specialized labor and coordination? Where do you plan to find them? Apart from a handful of dark wizards and the less able, how many truly useful young, strong wizards are there in today's magical community?" His points were practical and merciless. The wizarding world already suffered from a small population base and limited economic resources, real obstacles that any grand plan would have to confront. 69. Site selection approval. Jason didn't mind. A smile played on his lips. "Regarding manpower, Professor Snape, I have a rather unconventional idea. Before I enrolled, I built a crude alchemical golem with runes. It was rough, but it gave me the inspiration. Now the concept is more refined. Runic-reinforced golems would make perfect workers, tireless and utterly loyal." He pulled a roll of parchment from his pocket and unfurled it on Dumbledore's broad desk. The sheet showed complex geometric forms and arrays of runes, precise lines roughly outlining the base of a massive platform. "This is the floating city I envision, a simplified diagram of the foundation. I don't expect to build it all at once, but we can start with this behemoth," Jason said, pointing at the drawing. Dumbledore's eyes lingered on it, surprise flickering across his features. Even as just a foundation, its structural complexity and the intricacy of the runes far exceeded what he would have expected from a first year. How many hidden talents did this boy possess? Snape leaned over as well, studying the parchment. A soft humph escaped him. His expression was hard to read. He extended a pale, slender finger and tapped the large energy core drawn at the center. "You intend to make that colossal thing float with these scribbles and a pile of inert metal?" he said. "Lester, your imagination is commendable." Then his tone shifted, carrying an unreadable interest. "However, if you can actually make that monster lift off the ground by even an inch, I'll admit you possess abilities beyond the ordinary. If that happens, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes might consider investing in your fantasy, and I could even part with a few galleons, merely to enjoy an expensive fireworks show." Both Jason and Dumbledore were stunned. Snape offering sponsorship, that was extraordinary. Dumbledore looked from Jason to Snape and smiled. He plucked at a cluster of candies he had set down, popped one in his mouth, and crunched it audibly. "Severus is rarely so generous," he said. "In that case, Jason, your idea, strange as it sounds, is worth trying. You have already shifted many perceptions with your talent. I hope you'll keep that courage to explore." He winked at Jason, then considered the plan. "Behind Hogwarts, where the edge of the Forbidden Forest meets the mountains, there is a wide, seldom used area. If you need it, that site can be allocated to you for experiments. I'll inform staff and students that no one may approach without your permission." Dumbledore stood and looked out toward the distant trees and crags, the evening light casting long shadows. "Ambition is good, Jason. But remember, the greater the power, the greater the responsibility, and the easier it is to stray from the right path." His voice was calm, but carried a measured solemnity. "I've seen many talented wizards, unable to control their ambitions, go astray and do great harm to the magical world. The floating city you describe, if built, would be an achievement, but if it ever spun out of control, it could become an unprecedented threat." He sighed inwardly. This boy's talent already reminded him, alarmingly, of Tom Riddle's youth. He could only hope Jason's ambition wouldn't give rise to another Dark Lord. For now, at least, Jason wanted to build a city of his own, a far more peaceful aim than conquering the world. "Headmaster, I understand your concerns. My power will be used only for protection and creation, never for destruction or enslavement," Jason promised, folding the drawing with a serious expression. "I'll respect the limits. If I run into difficulties that require the school's help, I'll come to you. As for funding, I'll likely have to manage that myself, or rely on Severus's generosity." Dumbledore turned back, smiling as usual. Snape snorted, crossing his arms and leaning against a bookshelf. "I'm looking forward to watching you squander prize money from the Ministry and whatever you borrowed from certain foolish trolls in that wasteland. Lester, don't make me wait too long. My recent amusements have been rather dull." Jason chuckled. "As you wish, Professor. Very soon you'll have your unique fireworks display." When Jason appeared at the entrance to the Gryffindor common room, the chatter in the room stopped instantly. After a breath of silence, a roar of cheers rose up, drowning out everything that had come before. "He's back! Jason's back! Order of Merlin, first class. It really is the Order of Merlin, first class." The fat lady's portrait door had barely closed when Jason was swept up by the tide of students. Faces swayed around him, young, flushed with excitement, eyes wide with curiosity, admiration, and pride. Fred and George moved to his sides, one on each arm, using their bodies to hold back the crowd and carve out a small space. "Hey everyone, calm down. Give our hero some breathing room," Fred shouted, his own face lit with excitement. "That's right. Anyone who wants to see the medal, get in line. 3 seconds per person, no licking," George announced, producing a stopwatch from who knew where. Laughter rippled through the students, but no one stepped back. If anything, they pressed closer, craning their necks to look at Jason's chest, though he had already put the medal away. "Jason, show us! The Order of Merlin, first class!" a senior boy yelled, his voice trembling. "Yes, Jason, this might be the only chance in our lives to see one." Harry, Ron, and Hermione elbowed forward to the front. Harry's face wore a genuine smile. He threw an arm around Jason's shoulders, too excited to speak. "Jason, you actually did it? Merlin's beard." Ron blurted, reaching out as if to pat Jason, then thinking better of it, he stopped, fingers worrying his hair. Hermione stood beside him, cheeks flushed and eyes bright with tears. She pressed her lips together, trying to rein in her emotions, but her trembling lashes and clasped hands betrayed her. "Jason, congratulations. You did so well," she finally managed, her voice a little higher than usual. Jason looked at the earnest faces of his friends and then out at the expectant crowd. Warmth spread through his chest and he smiled. He took the velvet box from his pocket and opened it. For a moment, the common room fell silent. Then a ripple of astonished exclamations filled the air. The medal lay on dark blue velvet, ancient and solemn, deep purple enamel gleaming in the firelight, a golden M at its center, and a green ribbon that, while not matching Gryffindor's scarlet and gold, seemed a small flaw no one cared about right then. "Oh my, it's so much more beautiful than in the pictures," a girl gasped, covering her mouth. "This is the magical world's highest honor," a boy whispered reverently. "Jason, can I touch it? Just once?" a bold first-year asked, eyes shining. Jason smiled and held the box out. "Of course, just be careful." The youngster extended a trembling finger, brushed the cold metal, and withdrew it as if it had burned him, grinning with delight. I touched it. I touched the Order of Merlin, first class," he announced. Once one child had gone, others hurried forward. Gryffindors formed an awkward, eager queue, each taking a careful, solemn moment to touch the medal that meant so much. Even Fred and George had tucked away their mischief for the time being. They stood beside Jason, keeping order with unusually straight faces, though their eyes shone with pride. "If Percy saw this," Fred murmured to George, "he'd probably be so jealous his hair would stand on end." "Not just Percy," George replied with a look. "I reckon a lot of those old ministry types were feeling pretty put out today." When it was Ron's turn, he took a breath, tapped the medal with a finger, and grinned like an idiot. "Cool. This is cooler than 10 Triwizard Champions." Hermione waited until the hubbub had died down before she stepped forward. She examined the medal with the same meticulous care she applied to her books, as if committing every detail to memory. "This isn't just an honor, Jason. It's a responsibility. I heard your speech at the ministry. Pioneer of a new era. That was really well said." Jason blinked. He hadn't expected Hermione to know about the speech so soon, or to understand it so completely. "It wasn't the prophet," Hermione said, as if reading his thought. "Lee Jordan, he's got a distant cousin who does odd jobs at the ministry. He sent some insider details by owl. He said your speech left the old fuddy-duddies speechless." Jason laughed. Lee Jordan's channels were clearly as efficient as ever. Harry had been standing quietly to one side, watching. Seeing Jason honored brought him a simple, proud pleasure. Jason's achievement felt like an encouragement to them all, a reminder that even in uncertain times, friends could do remarkable things. "How does it feel, our big hero?" Harry asked with a smile, giving Jason a friendly nudge. Jason closed the box and handed it to Hermione. "Keep it for me," he said. "I think it'll be safer with you than with me." Hermione took the box carefully, solemn as ever. "It feels like I've finally accomplished something important," Jason continued, glancing around at the still excited Gryffindors. "But honestly, I prefer this to all the pomp at the ministry." Fred somehow reappeared with a mug of butterbeer. "That's right. To celebrate Gryffindor's youngest ever recipient of the Order of Merlin, First Class George and I are buying all the late-night snacks tonight." "Exactly," George added, producing a handful of bright candies. "We're talking Weasley's Wizard Wheezes' new Never Dull fireworks candies and self-refilling butterbeer mugs. On the house. But," he wagged a finger at the younger students, "no alcohol for the little ones." The common room erupted into cheerful chatter. Students clustered around Jason asking for details of the ceremony, whether Minister Fudge's belly really was as round as the papers said, whether Professor Snape had scowled the entire time as usual. Jason answered patiently, smiling at Fred and George's quips. The room was warm and full of genuine happiness, and it relaxed him more than the grandeur of the ministry's great hall ever could. As the night deepened and the firelight painted faces with a soft glow, the Order of Merlin, First Class, seemed to lend a new brightness to the whole of Gryffindor House. Harry watched Jason surrounded by friends, Hermione cradling the box, and Ron grinning nearby. The phrase Jason had used at the ministry, pioneer of a new era, kept returning to him. A tiny thrilling sense told Harry that something had shifted. Perhaps, quietly, a new era had begun. They, as Jason's friends, had been there at the start. The thought filled him with excitement and hopeful anticipation. The next morning, the noise and excitement in the Gryffindor common room had died down. The honor of the Order of Merlin, First Class, still sat warm on Jason's shoulders, but his mind had already moved on. In the afternoon, when there were no classes, he took Harry, Ron, and Hermione out to the experimental site Dumbledore had specially approved for him. It lay behind Hogwarts, near the Forbidden Forest, an open stretch of fallow land few people ever visited. The autumn sun gilded the weeds. The trees of the forest stood dense and dark in the distance. "This spot's good, big enough and secluded," Jason said, looking the place over with obvious satisfaction. He opened what looked like an ordinary brown leather case. He had registered it with the ministry. It was enchanted with an undetectable extension charm, so its interior was far larger than it appeared. He began laying things out: ingots with a metallic sheen, bundles of specially carved wood, and several boxes of crystals and powders. Ron's eyes nearly popped. "Did you empty Gringotts?" he blurted. Harry, too, stared. He couldn't name most of the materials, but he could feel the magical hum coming from them, and knew they weren't ordinary. Hermione had already crouched down close to a metal plate carved with complex runes, watching intently. "These are only a small part," Jason said. "Remember the idea I mentioned in the headmaster's office?" Harry and Ron both looked at him. "A floating city," Jason announced. "I'm going to build the foundation for it here first." A, a floating city? Like a city that flies? Ron's voice went high with disbelief, then quickly flipped to exhilaration. He stared at the spread of materials and back at Jason, his expression switching from incredulous to ecstatic in seconds. Harry could only goggle. He'd expected Jason to attempt something big, but not anything on this scale. A city in the sky. It was more staggering than even defeating Voldemort. The thought of being part of creating such a thing thrilled him. "Of course it's real, and I'd like you all to help," Jason said with a smile. "We'd love to. Building a floating city. Merlin, that's brilliant." Ron crowed, jabbing a finger at himself and then at Harry, face flushed with excitement. Hermione rose more composedly, though there was excitement in her voice too. "If we're building a city, the landscaping needs careful planning. I can take care of planting magical species adapted to high-altitude environments to make the city livable and attractive." "Good idea," Jason said approvingly. "But first I need to test how well you've been learning." He cleared his throat. "About the basics of ancient runes I taught earlier. Hermione, you go first. For the runic array that gives mobility to a golem's power core, name at least 3 different combinations and their characteristics." Hermione thought for a moment, then answered smoothly. "One uses a wind traction rune as the core, combined with a lightness rune and a continuous charge rune. It consumes little energy and moves quickly, but it can't carry heavy loads. A second type uses an earth stability core with reinforced load-bearing runes and a damping rune. Very stable and strong, but slow and energy-hungry. The third uses a levitation core paired with inertia compensation and a balancing rune. It provides excellent maneuverability in 3 dimensions, but its energy efficiency depends on the quality of the levitation rune." She gave pros, cons, and use cases without hesitation. Jason listened, pleased. Harry and Ron, called next, were less composed. A strength rune has to be there, right? And a rune to make it move." Ron hazarded uncertainly. He'd seen some of the concepts before, but only had a hazy grasp. "There's also a stabilization array that keeps a golem from toppling when it moves," Harry added. "And there are several types of floating runes, although I can't remember the exact differences." "Not bad," Jason said with a smile. "Ancient runes is complex, no easier than advanced Muggle mathematics. For you to retain this much in a short time is impressive." He clapped his hands. "But theory's not enough. Today I'll show you how to build a high-level magical golem." Jason pulled out a few different metal ingots and a fist-sized transparent crystal. With a white powder, he traced a complex circular alchemical array on the ground. The lines and nodes began to glow faintly. "This is a simplified alchemical transmutation array," he explained. "It can reshape and recombine metals of different properties to form an alloy skeleton suited to carrying runes." He placed the ingots in the center and murmured a short, ancient incantation. The array flared, light flowed, and the metals slowly melted and braided together until a humanoid metal skeleton took shape. "Wow," Ron breathed, watching without blinking. Harry's curiosity got the better of him. "Jason, could this transmutation array make the Philosopher's Stone?" Jason paused in his work and looked at him. "Theoretically, a powerful enough alchemical array, the right knowledge, and the correct rare materials could create something capable of transmutation and longevity. But the true Philosopher's Stone, the one associated with real immortality, requires conditions so extreme it's virtually impossible, and it crosses grave magical taboos. The cost is usually intolerable." He didn't dwell on the subject, returning to the golem. After the metal skeleton was complete, Jason picked up the crystal and began carving a runic array for the power core with a special knife. His movements were quick and precise. Runes lit inside the crystal until it became a constantly rotating core of light. "How intelligent and efficient a golem is depends greatly on its core and its control," Jason said. "Ideally, you want a suitable spirit to anchor the golem, certain natural spirits, for example, or, in theory, a sufficiently strong undead. That saves a lot of materials for complex logic circuits and gives the golem autonomy and learning ability. Undead? Ron shivered, then his eyes lit up. So we could catch Peeves, stuff him in there, and make him work round the clock so he can't cause trouble. Pfft, Hermione and Harry couldn't help laughing. Jason chuckled too. That's an amusing idea, but Peeves' chaos wouldn't make a very dependable puppet core. What I've built here is a first-tier advanced magical automaton. I've engraved some basic logical judgment functions into its core rune array so it can understand and execute more complex orders. He continued without pausing. For example, it can manage low-level labor puppets made from ordinary stone or handle delicate tasks like operating tools or automatically carving the magical circuits I've planned elsewhere. His hands moved quickly. He fitted the rune-etched crystal core into the metal skeleton's chest, then pulled out flexible metal sheets and treated leather, and in short order, covered the frame. Soon, a humanoid puppet stood before them, about the height of an adult, gleaming a dark silver. Its joints were snug and purposeful. Its build looked tough. Jason snapped his fingers. The puppet's eyes flashed red, then clacked as the joints moved. It knelt on one knee toward him and said in a slightly stiff but very clear synthesized voice, "Obeying your command, Creator." Harry, Ron, and Hermione stared. The puppet and the intelligence it displayed gave them the first tangible glimpse of the grand plan Jason had described for the floating city. Jason looked over the wide wasteland and back at the distant mountain ranges, a calculating smile on his face. The foundation of the floating city will need an enormous amount of high-quality stone, he said. Hogwarts sits among the mountains. It has no shortage of stone. I wonder, when my city rises, whether the surrounding peaks will be a few shorter or even largely stripped. When Headmaster Dumbledore notices his backyard looks different, I wonder if he'll be so upset he plucks out a few whiskers. Harry and Ron exchanged bewildered looks. Several mountains, Ron rasped, suddenly small and panicked. How much stone would that take? Hermione stayed calm. Jason, extracting that amount of stone with only the three of us would be impossible. Of course not just us. Jason patted the dark silver puppet at his side. Noma, starting now, follow the blueprints I've given you and carve the preliminary energy guiding arrays on the marked rock faces. Yes, Creator. The red light in the puppet's eyes shifted to blue, and it walked steadily toward the pile of huge rocks Jason had marked. A glowing carving blade extended from one metal finger and began to etch into the hard surface, sparks flying with a rhythmic precision. As for the rest of us, Jason said, turning to Harry, Ron, and Hermione with a mischievous grin, before I produce the first batch of basic labor puppets, we need a sufficiently flat, open space. My newly recruited excellent employees, this is your time to shine. He handed each of them a scroll. These are practical basics, the weeding charm to clear vegetation, the fossil to mud charm and its inverse, mud to stone, which are perfect for leveling ground. Hermione, your spell control is the best. Take the precise work of the fossil to mud charm. Make the ground as flat as possible. Harry, do large-scale weeding. Ron, help Hermione and practice the shaping spells. Finally, something we can do. Ron brightened at once, eager to try. Harry nodded, the same enthusiasm in his eyes. Hermione buried her nose in the parchment, studying the spell steps with serious concentration. Soon the wasteland behind Hogwarts echoed with the rise and fall of their spells. Weeds vanish! Harry waved his wand, and long swathes of coarse growth withered and fell. Stone to mud, Hermione intoned quietly, coaxing clods and gravel into softer, flatter earth. Ron fumbled at first. He either turned rock into a muddy puddle or hardened mud into awkward lumps, earning a few exasperated eye rolls from Hermione and a lot of laughs that lightened the heavy work. Jason supervised and offered occasional tips while also making more basic labor puppets. Rather than using complex alchemy this time, he simply transfigured hard rocks into rough humanoid shapes, then carved simple movement and command-receiving runes into their cores with a specially made magical carving blade. These need no high intelligence, he explained to Harry. They just need to follow simple commands. Move, dig, cut. Quickly he had a dozen 2-meter-tall stone figures standing in a row on the newly leveled space. Rough in appearance, they radiated sturdiness. Jason set up 4 glowing charging arrays at the field's edge. These will continuously replenish the stone figures' energy so they can work without stopping. Now, I'll equip them. He produced hard alloy sheets, shaped huge saw blades and drill bits with a cutting charm, and fitted them to the stone figure's arms. He added silencing and sharpening charms and engraved basic levitation runes on the backs of some so they could carry heavy blocks. Come see. Jason called the three over and pointed to the equipped stone figures and to Noma, still carving marks on the rocks. Noma will etch the guiding arrays and cutting marks on the target mountain. These stone figures will then do the bulk quarrying according to those marks, some cutting, others transporting the quarried stone to designated areas. His voice grew eager and animated. I'm going to build a fully automated stone collection and processing assembly line here. You can't build a city on hand labor alone. Only an automated production line can work fast and efficiently, around the clock. That evening, after a day of hard work, the four sat around a bonfire and ate. Ron rubbed his sore arms and complained that his bones felt like they were coming apart. Harry was exhausted, but felt a new kind of satisfaction. Hermione ate in small, thoughtful bites, replaying the shaping spells and planning how to improve. Jason watched them and felt that his plan had finally taken a solid first step. 73. The first Foundation Rock Levitation Test. Early in the morning, in a secluded valley near Hogwarts, autumn sunlight filtered through sparse leaves and cast dappled shadows across the ground. Jason led Hermione, Harry, and Ron to a specially approved experimental site. Fred and George, naturally optimistic, trailed close behind, buzzing with excitement. Welcome to our future construction site, Jason said, pointing to a cleared, flat area where several giant granite bases, pre-processed by Noma, were already stacked. The blocks were regular in shape, their surfaces rough, but they gave off an unmistakable sense of weight. He took two simply bound notebooks from his satchel and handed them to Fred and George. This is the first volume of my basic runic alchemy introduction. Your task is the initial processing of these granite blocks according to the methods in the book. Don't underestimate it. This job makes the stone easier to carve with runes, and you'll learn some basic alchemy principles. Fred flipped open his notebook and squinted at the dense runic patterns and formulas. George, more tactile, tapped a granite block with his knuckles and asked, Jason, can this actually fly? Of course. Noma's already done part of the work, but to make it truly float, it still needs my alchemy array for the final transformation, Jason said, pointing to the largest granite base. He crouched, pulled a rolled parchment from his satchel, and spread it on the ground. On the blueprint, complex lines wove together into a massive circular array, each node annotated with intricate runic combinations. This is the core of the floating array. Hermione leaned in, eyes fixed on the design. Oh my, Jason, this is far more complicated than any ancient runic array I've ever seen. Harry and Ron just stared at the winding lines, bewildered by the arcane complexity. Fred and George widened their eyes too, trying to decipher the blueprint before abandoning the attempt and returning to their notebooks. The principle of levitation isn't complicated in concept, Jason explained. The array transforms ordinary stone into a special kind of floating rock. That rock absorbs free magic from the air and converts it into an upward repulsive force, which creates buoyancy. That's the theory. Practically, you need precise magical guidance and exact rune carving. He picked up a specially crafted carving knife. Magic threaded through his fingertips, making them glow faintly. He didn't rush. He traced the rock with the blade as if confirming its surface. Hermione watched closely, jotting notes. Fred and George tried to match Jason's movements with their manuals, but their work was clumsy. There was a lot of banging and cursing as they adjusted. Jason inhaled and began carving on the largest granite base. The knife slid across the stone without harsh friction, leaving smooth, deliberate marks. Runes lit beneath his touch, their light flickering and crawling across the surface until they sank deep into the rock. Each stroke was precise, fluid, and saturated with the essence of arcane energy. Minutes passed in reverent silence, except for the whisper of the blade and the twins' occasional exclamations. When Jason finished the last rune and withdrew the knife, the array flared into dazzling light, bathing every face in its glow. The great rock trembled and began to hum, a low vibration that rolled through the valley. Fred and George high-fived. They'd personally done the initial processing, and the rock's shiver filled them with pride. Everyone held their breath as the base slowly detached from the ground and rose. It made no sound and stirred not a wisp of air, mounting steadily until it hovered a little more than a person's height above the ground, perfectly still. "It actually flew," Ron said, rubbing his eyes as if he might be mistaken. Harry's face split into a wide grin. He'd seen flying brooms and cars, but a massive stone on nothing but its own enchanted structure was something else entirely. Hermione's cheeks were flushed with excitement as she scribbled data into her notebook, muttering, "Magic absorption efficiency normal, buoyancy stable, no energy overflow, it's perfect." Fred and George were already dreaming aloud. "We could put runic alchemy in our joke shop. Levitating prank items," Fred whispered, barely containing his glee. "Imagine a portable levitating shop," George breathed. "We'll open a branch in the floating city." Jason stepped forward, pleased with the result. He touched the suspended rock. It was cold and solid. This was intended to be the foundation of the floating city, later to be built into 2 layers from which countless magical structures would rise. "This is only the preliminary test of the floating base," he said, looking around at their eager faces. "To build a real floating city, we'll need a far more powerful, more stable energy core and far more complex arrays. But this is a very good start. And this is our base. Keep going," he encouraged, and the promise of a city in the clouds lit everyone's imagination. As they reveled in success, Jason's gaze flicked to the distant edge of the forbidden forest. A dark shadow moved swiftly there, almost too fast to track. For an instant, he felt watched, an odd, fleeting tightening in his chest. He let his gaze slide away without a sound, keeping his companion's celebration untouched by whatever had passed. The glow from the Order of Merlin, first class, had long since faded in the Gryffindor common room, but the honor still hummed quietly in the students' conversations. Jason did not bask in the praise. By the 3rd day, he had thrown himself back into optimizing the floating city array. His desk was littered with specially treated parchment covered in precise rune diagrams and energy circuits copied from the Arcane Codex. His quill raced across the paper, paused, furrowed his brow, eased, the way someone who understood a craft worked. Hermione had been in the library since dawn, poring through dusty tomes of ancient magic, hunting for any theoretical clue that might strengthen Jason's design. In the afternoon, the 4 of them slipped into the room of requirement. The vast chamber held training dummies and the faint traces of other people's practice. The air smelled faintly of spellwork. "Today we'll work on new basic attack spells," Jason announced. He showed Harry how to bend lightning on the fly, curving the bolt so it traced an arc rather than flying in a straight line. Harry concentrated, attempting to mimic the motion. Sparks occasionally danced from his wand as he wrestled with the unstable element. Ron practiced arcane missiles, small condensed spheres of energy. Useful for their flexibility rather than raw power, they required steady control. Ron stared at the dummy, waved his wand, and a wobbling purple orb shot out. Ron's magic had always been a little rough. The missile looped awkwardly, missed the target entirely, and rocketed toward the ceiling. Bang! The chandelier tore free with a terrible crash. Wood splintered, dust exploded into the air, and the chandelier smashed down among the dummies. Several training figures shattered with a harsh, scraping sound. The room of requirement erupted into chaos. "Ron," Harry and Hermione shouted in unison, faces a mixture of exasperation and disbelief. Harry pressed a hand to his forehead. Ron stood stunned, a wisp of smoke curling from the tip of his wand. Jason massaged his temples. This kid had a gift for unintentional catastrophes. The heavy wooden door creaked open just then. Professor Snape filled the doorway, swathed in his customary black robes. He had been patrolling nearby and had been drawn by the noise and the surge of magic. He surveyed the ruined dummies, then fixed his dark eyes on the 3 students standing amid the wreckage: Jason, Harry, and Ron. His look lingered on Jason, a sharp, assessing gaze that seemed to say accidents followed him like weather. Jason dampened the active magic in his body and stepped forward with a polite smile. "Professor Snape," he greeted. Snape's voice was low and cold. "What exactly are you doing?" "We're doing spell adaptability training," Jason replied evenly. He gestured to the broken dummies. "Ron's arcane missiles got a bit overenthusiastic. A small, self-deprecating joke to cover for Ron and to make light of the private session. Snape's mouth drew down in a barely concealed sneer. He did not leave. Instead, he leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, watching as if he were an examiner rather than a passerby, carefully parsing Jason's posture, inflection, the way he taught. He was trying to map out the boy's talents and hidden repertoire. Jason decided to play to the audience. He knew Snape was watching. It was part of the plan. He did not flinch under the professor's scrutiny. He focused on Harry, as if oblivious to the man in the doorway. "Your lightning's too rigid," he told Harry. "Make it turn. Don't let it fly straight." Jason extended his hand. No wand rested in his fingers, yet a faint glow shimmered at his fingertips. With a practiced flick, the lightning Harry had been summoning that had threatened to sail straight became a graceful, lethal arc and struck a distant dummy dead center. Snape's eyebrow twitched. Routing another person's spell without a wand required precise magical control and an intimate knowledge of the spell's structure, skills no ordinary first-year possessed. Surprise flashed over his face before he smoothed it away. Harry and Ron were equally dumbstruck. They had expected Jason to be good. They were still surprised each time he produced such subtle control. Hermione stood nearby, eyes bright, furiously recording every demonstration and explanation in her notebook. Jason continued, calm and methodical. He paused occasionally to interweave technical notes. The energy conversion efficiency of the floating city rocks still needs improvement. If we could find a more stable conduction rune, the effect might last longer. The remark was casual, as if mentioning a small snag in his research. Snape's interest visibly sharpened. Floating city rocks. He remembered the Daily Prophet report and the headmaster's approval for the Floating City project. This boy not only showed unusual capability in class, but was pursuing ambitious private work as well. Snape's curiosity deepened into calculation. He didn't deduct points or scold them for the mess. He straightened, swept his gaze over Jason once more, and said in that same cold voice, "Don't blow up Hogwarts." His black robes swished as he turned and disappeared down the corridor. Jason watched him go, inwardly pleased. Snape's visit meant he'd be paying closer attention, exactly the extra scrutiny Jason had hoped to attract. With the potions master monitoring him, the Floating City project might find an unexpected ally. Snape's position and his access to resources could prove useful. The thought made Jason quietly excited. The night was deep, and the fire in the Gryffindor common room had dwindled to a few dark red embers. The students were long gone. The great room was empty, except for one figure hunched over the heavy oak table. Quill scratched on parchment as lines of arcane runes and energy circuits formed beneath his hand. The success of the Floating City rock test that afternoon still buzzed in his veins, but this was only the beginning. To turn that vision into reality, he would need massive financial and material support. He needed powerful patrons, wizards with authority or deep foundations. Two names rose first in his mind, Snape and Dumbledore. He wanted to change the tragedies that seemed fated to come. An hour later, as he sketched another runic circuit, the heavy wooden door creaked open. A gust of night air stirred the embers and sent shadows dancing across the floor. Professor Severus Snape filled the doorway, his face darker than usual, black robes hanging like a shadow. In one hand he held a folded sheet of parchment, a copy of Spirit-Guiding Meditation and Elemental Particle Fusion Theory, the same pamphlet Jason had given Professor McGonagall earlier. Lester. Snape's voice was flat. The professor used the surname. Jason looked up without alarm. Snape stalked forward and slapped the parchment on the table. His dark eyes pinned him as he spoke, each phrase precise and cutting. "I saw your so-called Floating City rock test. Lester, do you really believe that a few crude rune arrays can make a giant rock float indefinitely and serve as a foundation for a city? That is fanciful." He paused, a mocking curl in his tone. "From a potions perspective, any energy conversion comes with loss. Your claim that ordinary stone can be turned into Floating City rock is as absurd as turning mud into gold. The repulsive force you invoke requires a continuous and massive supply of magic. How do you prevent enormous energy loss during conversion? How do you maintain long-term buoyancy rather than having it fall one day and flatten Hogwarts?" Snape dissected the idea with the cold logic of his subject, laying bare every potential flaw. Jason listened in silence. When Snape finished, Jason picked up a fresh quill and drew a complex rune pattern across a blank sheet. "Professor, your doubts are reasonable," he said calmly, "but the energy loss you describe belongs to traditional frameworks." He tapped the rune he had drawn. "The runes I study, especially high-level arrays, are built around a self-sustaining energy circulation. The floating array I designed does not merely convert cast magic into repulsion. Specific rune circuits guide free-floating elemental particles in the air to form micro-elemental cycles within the rock. Those cycles draw ambient energy to replenish themselves, greatly reducing the need for an external magic supply." Jason pointed to a particular symbol. "This is an elemental guiding rune. Paired with an energy solidification rune, it can stably store absorbed magic inside the rock's structure, forming a temporary elemental pool. That's the basic application. Once the floating city is scaled up, I can construct a true elemental pool that draws pure elemental energy from the void, a near-perpetual source." Snape's expression shifted. He stared at the unfamiliar pattern, memories sliding through his mind. The strange battle in the Forbidden Forest, the fluid way Jason had corrected Harry's spell without a wand in the Room of Requirement that afternoon. The ideas of elemental circulation and an elemental pool lay beyond the magic he had learned, yet they followed an internal logic that was hard to dismiss. A flicker of shock crossed his face, then he smothered it. Silence settled, punctuated only by the occasional crackle from the dying fire. Snape's tone became probing. "If successful, what do you intend to do with this floating city?" Jason set down his quill and met Snape's gaze. "Dispose," he echoed. "Professor, it won't be something to dispose of. It will be the future of the magical world." He smiled, as if describing something already real. "Imagine a city suspended in the air, an unprecedented center for magical research, drawing the world's best minds to explore the mysteries of magic, to break the chains of bloodline, and to give Muggle-born witches and wizards equal opportunity. A haven independent of the Muggle world, a place where we can research and live without interference. A new magical order." His voice carried the kind of fervor that stirs conviction. "It will be the magical world's strongest fortress, its most advanced academy, and a prosperous trade center. It will attract every eye and become the place everyone aspires to." The vision was inspiring at the surface, but Jason harbored a sharper motive beneath it. For someone who had cheated fate to get as far as he had, the floating city would also serve as a base to extract resources from other worlds, an opportunity to enrich himself and secure his future. He kept that intent tightly folded beneath the rhetoric. Snape's eyes flashed. He had been watching quietly for days, slipping to the back of the castle to observe Jason's construction site from a discreet distance. He had seen crude golems, ordinary rocks animated and directed, cutting and hauling huge stones with a relentless efficiency under Noma's command. He had witnessed the first floating base in person, a massive rock suspended and stable. The sight had struck him. Perhaps, he thought, he could help this young wizard, and in doing so, steer him away from ruin. To truly back the project would require more than words. It would mean opening his vault and tapping into his family's assets. Snape weighed the risks. He could not allow this boy's ambition to turn to arrogance and squander an investment. If he were to support Lester, it would be on terms, tight control, strict oversight, and a clear hand on where the funds went. The embers shifted in the hearth as Snape considered the future, a floating city and the man who might build it, and the choice of whether to fund genius or to try to contain it. He made it plain. Lord Voldemort's shadow had never truly faded. The power and ambition Jason showed might, in time, prove a decisive counterweight to that darkness. Dumbledore needed forces to balance Voldemort. This floating city could be the beginning of hope. "I have some savings. I can invest in your floating city," Snape said abruptly, though Jason felt the man's heart beating a little too fast. It was almost all of Snape's savings. Jason remained outwardly calm, but he knew what that gesture meant. Snape was not merely putting up galleons, he was lending the recognition of the magic world's foremost potions master, a weight that outstripped 1,000 words. In time, if Snape were to head that potions works, there would be no better choice. "Professor, Your vision has always been unique. Since you've decided to invest, of course I will reserve a special place for you, Jason replied with a sincere smile. When the floating city is finished, I will build you a private manor in the most scenic spot. It will have sweeping views and the most advanced research facilities for potions, with guaranteed access to the rarest ingredients. You can focus on your work there, spend your remaining years in peace, and become one of the floating city's most respected residents. Snape's mouth twitched almost imperceptibly at the phrase, "spend your remaining years." He had spent a lifetime moving among schemes and dangers. Retirement was not something he had expected to be offered so plainly. Still, he nodded, and for the first time an almost indescribable, complex emotion crossed his usually implacable face. "Deal," he said finally, and turned away, the hem of his black robe whispering as he left the lounge. Jason watched the doorway until the robe disappeared. He had not only secured funding and endorsement, he had pulled a double agent to his side. Whether openly or secretly, Snape would be one of his most reliable allies in the future, and that support would be worth more than any pile of galleons. A few days later, late at night, an owl tapped regularly at Jason's dormitory window. It bore a letter in Dumbledore's hurried, slanting hand, messy as ever, but with a seriousness between the lines. Jason was asked to come to the headmaster's office immediately. He wondered what could require such a summons at that hour. The headmaster's office was warm. The fire in the hearth burned brightly, and the room smelled faintly of lemon sherbet and old books. Dumbledore sat behind his large desk, his silver beard catching the firelight, but the look behind his half-moon spectacles was not as relaxed as usual. A dish of still bubbling cockroach clusters steamed on the desk, though Dumbledore himself showed no inclination to taste them. "Good evening, Jason," Dumbledore said, indicating the chair opposite. "Good evening, Headmaster." Jason sat and waited. Dumbledore began in his familiar conversational way, asking about Jason's studies and expressing genuine curiosity about the experimental site on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. "I hear your floating rock experiments are going quite well. Even Professor Snape has visited a few times," he said with a hint of amusement. "Your floating city idea is remarkable. Perhaps one day Hogwarts will consider a satellite campus in your Sky City." Jason answered politely, but he knew Dumbledore had circled around to something more important. He spoke about his Arcane Codex research, his thoughts on knowledge sharing in the magical world, and the importance of cultivating innovative wizards. Dumbledore's eyes brightened at some of Jason's insights, and for a while, the office relaxed into easy conversation. Then the mood shifted. Dumbledore sighed and steered the talk toward the unavoidable name. "The matter of Professor Quirrell and that unwelcome guest on the back of his head has been taken care of," he said, though concern shadowed his voice. "Lord Voldemort's little fragment of soul, although you destroyed it for the time being, has not been utterly annihilated." Jason nodded. He knew that better than anyone. "The incident with the Philosopher's Stone and Quirrell," he continued, "was meant as a test I set for Harry and his friends. I wanted them to be forced prematurely into real danger, so they might find courage within themselves, understand friendship and sacrifice." Dumbledore folded his hands on the desk, at regret softening his tone. "But the enemy left the stage earlier than I had planned. The stone, intended as a lure and a trial, has lost much of its value. I must admit, Jason, your intervention has altered my arrangements." There was worry beneath Dumbledore's words, worry for Harry's and the others' rate of growth. In the original unfolding, the Philosopher's Stone episode had been a crucial step in the trio's development, shaping their minds, bravery, and bond. "I understand your concern," Jason said. "Challenges do push people to grow." "Precisely so." Dumbledore's clear blue eyes fixed on Jason with unusual sharpness. "Harry bears an extraordinary destiny. The foe he will one day face is far more terrible than a professor possessed by a fragment of soul. Hermione's intelligence and Ron's loyalty are indispensable, but they still need more tempering, harsher trials, to become the kind of fighters who can stand against such darkness." He spoke plainly of what he had seen, Jason's strength, his intellect, and the influence he already exerted on Harry and the others. That observation seed-bedded an idea. Perhaps it would be better to let Jason design the tests. After all, The instrument Dumbledore had planned to use had been neutralized by this young wizard. An old proverb came to him: "If you ring a bell, you must be ready to answer it." "Jason," Dumbledore said, his voice probing now, "you always find ways to astonish, by your meditation, by that audacious floating city. I want to ask something of you." He leaned forward a little. "Do you have any way to create trials similar to the one with the stone? Trials that will push Harry and his friends, temper their character, teach them to use their wits, and deepen their friendship, while still ensuring their safety? Can you devise exercises that achieve the true purpose of training without exposing them to undue, irreparable harm?" 77. Suspicion of Banban. When Dumbledore asked that question, Jason felt a burst of joy. It was exactly the opening he'd been waiting for, a perfect official pretext to give Harry, Ron, and Hermione the special training he'd been planning. He had intended to give them more systematic, advanced instruction when the right opportunity appeared. They were, after all, his best candidates for exploring other worlds. The problem had always been finding a plausible reason and an appropriate setting. Now the headmaster had handed him one on a silver platter. Jason pretended to think it over, putting on an air of solemn consideration. After a moment, he looked up with a secretive smile. "Headmaster, your idea is excellent. I actually have a plan that could solve this very problem," he said. Dumbledore's eyes brightened at once, lighting up like stars. "Oh, do tell, Jason. You always have such interesting ideas." Jason kept them dangling. "It will require some preparation and a few special props. To be effective, the scenario will need a little misdirection, even a bit of theater." Dumbledore understood immediately. He neither pressed for details nor balked at the vague request. If anything, he grew more excited, like a child at the prospect of a new game. "Misdirection and drama, you say? That sounds delightful. If you need anything, ask. Hogwarts' resources are at your disposal, even some of my father's private collections, if necessary." He looked at Jason with obvious trust. "I trust your judgment. Go prepare. I'm looking forward to your solution." Jason bowed slightly. "I won't let you down, Headmaster." He left the office buoyed, as light as if Wingardium Leviosa had been cast on him. Dumbledore's proposal fit perfectly into the script Jason already had in mind. The first act needed a very particular catalyst. Later, in the Gryffindor common room, the fire still burned bright, casting a warm glow on small clusters of students. Ron sat cross-legged on the carpet, a scrap of cheese in hand, fiddling with his unimpressive-looking rat, Scabbers. The creature sprawled lazily in Ron's lap, twitching its nose now and then, indifferent to the attention. Jason's eyes lingered on the rat for a few seconds before he drifted over to Ron's side and asked casually, "How's Scabbers lately? Still as sleepy?" "Jason," Ron looked up, smiling. "Same as ever, eating and sleeping. Sometimes I think he's about to turn into a ghost. He's lived way longer than a normal house rat." He pinched off a bit of cheese and held it out. Scabbers sniffed slowly, then took it. Jason said nothing more, moving to his seat and beginning to sort the rare books on ancient defensive magic he'd borrowed from Dumbledore, but his peripheral vision kept returning to the unassuming rat. The next afternoon, Jason found Harry and Hermione tucked into a corner of the library, hunched over spellwork. He sat down with them and lowered his voice. "I've been looking into some of the deeper mysteries of transfiguration," he began, trying to sound enigmatic. "I've found that some beings can conceal their true selves through a very ancient kind of transfiguration, so complete that it even reproduces the original scent." Harry and Hermione exchanged puzzled looks. Hermione was quick to frown. "Do you mean an animagus? But animagi can still be detected by certain spells, and they rarely keep an animal form for decades." "Not an animagus," Jason said. "This is older, far more secret. A disguise so thorough and maintained for so long that it becomes second nature. If the form has been held for 10 years or more, it can be almost impossible to tell, even from scent or subtle magical tests." Harry looked baffled. "What are you getting at, Jason?" Jason's gaze drifted to the window toward Gryffindor Tower as he chose his words carefully. "I'm just wondering if some things we assume are ordinary, pets for instance, are really as simple as they seem." He let his glance settle on Ron's bedchamber without being obvious. "Like Ron's Scabbers." "Scabbers?" Harry and Ron blurted at the same time, faces showing incredulity. Jason, you're joking, right? Harry sounded amused. Scabbers is just a rat. He has lived a long time and he's missing a toe, but Hermione started out skeptical, but she trusted Jason's judgment. He wasn't one for baseless speculation. Her expression went thoughtful as she mentally cataloged Scabbers' oddities. Wait, she said. Scabbers is unusual. For a common rat to live 12 years is highly unlikely. I remember Mrs. Weasley saying he belonged to Percy first, and that Ron got him afterward. He could be even older than that. She put together the other details. He never behaves like a typical magical pet. He sleeps all the time and reacts very slowly to magic. A few times I had the impression he was watching us with eyes that weren't exactly rat eyes. Just a fleeting feeling, but it was there. As Hermione spoke, her face grew more serious. She recalled passages from old bestiaries about desperate wizards who hid by adopting weak animal forms that would not attract attention. Harry listened, and the skepticism on his face started to fade into alarm. He thought of how listless Scabbers always seemed, how he rarely moved with energy, not like a normal pet. The idea planted itself and took root, leaving Harry looking suddenly unsettled. The fire in the headmaster's office burned low, making the odd silver instruments on the mantelpiece tremble ever so slightly. Dumbledore had just learned a new spell from Jason Lester, the Eye of Truth, and its power to pierce disguises had astonished him. He had sent Fawkes to fetch Severus Snape at once. He wanted the potions master's opinion, and perhaps to explore the spell's deeper implications together. Snape pushed the door open, black robes trailing like a living shadow. His usually slightly greasy features were set in that habitual, appraising scowl. "Headmaster, at this hour?" "Severus, sit." Dumbledore indicated the empty chair opposite him, a rare excitement brightening his face. "I've been shown a most singular charm by Mr. Lester, the Eye of Truth. It is said to reveal what the finest transfiguration and the darkest confusion seek to conceal." Snape's eyebrows twitched. His mouth automatically shaped itself into an expression of disdain before he remembered his own interests. Jason's inventions had, after all, been profitable in unexpected ways. The mention of a spell that could reveal truth piqued the professional part of him he could not help but heed. "Lester," he said sourly, "that first year who is always up to something? You have not been sent off on a wild goose chase, Albus?" Dumbledore neither bristled nor denied. From a desk drawer, he produced a small, intricately carved silver box and opened it. Inside lay an unassuming pebble. "I cast 7 transfigurations and 3 powerful confundus charms upon this stone. Severus, would you try the Eye of Truth on it?" He handed Snape a scrap of parchment on which the spell's activation was written. Snape's gaze flicked from the parchment to the pebble and back again. Curiosity won over hauteur. He accepted the paper, mouthed the awkward incantation, and trained the tip of his wand on the pebble. A thin, pure shaft of light issued from Snape's wand and bathed the stone. Seconds later, his expression changed. Under the spell, the pebble's surface seemed to peel away in layers, and the transfiguration and confundus charms Dumbledore had placed on it drained off like water. The pebble's true form emerged, a dull luster dragon scale etched with ancient, worn runes. Snape's voice came out a little dry. "By Merlin." He looked up at Dumbledore, eyes wide with a dawning, unsettled respect. The Eye of Truth was not a brute force dispelling charm he knew. It felt more like a direct sight into essence. Before Snape could form another thought, there was a polite little knock at the door. "Come in," Dumbledore called. Jason Lester entered with the same composed air he always wore. In his hands was Ron Weasley's plump, gray rat, limp and unconscious. Jason had borrowed him with a deft stupefy, while Ron and Harry argued Quidditch tactics in the common room. "Good evening, Headmaster, Professor Snape." He bowed slightly in greeting. Snape's eyes found the rat, and his face darkened at once. The anger rose hot and immediate, not only because a Gryffindor pet had been brought into the sanctity of the headmaster's office, but because the boy's actions seemed to mock them all at a time when Snape's own composure had been pried open. "Lester, what do you think you're doing? Do you want Gryffindor to be docked 100 points?" he barked, his voice sharp with irritation. Jason ignored the rebuke. He walked straight to Dumbledore's desk and set Scabbers gently on the polished wood. "Headmaster, Professor Snape," he said, looking at them both. "Perhaps this little creature will help answer a question that has troubled you for some time." Snape's scowl deepened into something far harder. He felt condescended to, and more than that, he felt his dignity affronted in the presence of the headmaster. As if summoned by the urgency in Dumbledore's earlier message, Professor McGonagall hurried through the door in a flurry, wand already in hand. "Albus, Severus, Student Lester, what is the meaning of this?" she demanded, taking in the odd tableau at once. Snape purple with displeasure, Dumbledore composed but intent, Jason unnervingly serene, and a plump rat on the desk. Dumbledore raised his wand. The tip gleamed as he aimed it at Scabbers. "Eye of truth," he intoned. The light that poured from the elder wand was brighter, purer than Snape's earlier attempt. It wrapped the rat completely. For a moment, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Under the gaze of the three professors and the boy, Scabbers began to tremble. Gray fur flaked away like dust, dissolving into pinpricks of light. Pale, loose skin showed beneath. The creature's body swelled and lengthened with a sick, wet sound. Limbs bent and reformed with a dreadful, teeth-clenching grinding. A surge of magic, older and fouler than anything the dragon's scale had given off, burst from the changing form. It carried with it a stale, corrupt smell that made parchments on the desk flutter and sent a ripple through the fire. "Oh my goodness," McGonagall gasped, one hand to her mouth. Her eyes were wide and disbelieving. Snape's outrage drained away, replaced by an utterly different emotion, raw, stunned horror. He stared as a face emerged where rat muzzle had been, not an animal at all, but a human's features creased and pale, hair clinging in thin strands. The man's eyes opened, glassy and terrible. It was the face of someone who had been living behind a lie. For 12 years, the Ministry had declared him dead, had even honored his memory. For 12 years, Severus had seethed at the name, convinced the man had been part of the betrayal that had cost Lily Potter her life. Now, in front of them all, the Eye of Truth was stripping away 12 years of concealment. The filthy, cowardly truth, hidden in plain sight as a common rat, was being revealed. Snape felt as if his whole foundation of certainty had been struck. The room seemed to tilt as the truth, ugly and undeniable, unfolded on the desk. Severus Snape stared at the plump, rat-like man cowering on the desk, his mind suddenly numb as if filled with molten lead. He rubbed his eyes as if that could erase the absurd, unbearable sight. This can't be Peter Pettigrew, that cowardly, sniveling creature who had spent his life skulking behind James Potter and Sirius Black, the one who ought to have been dead, the martyr who supposedly died trying to stop Black. But the face before him, twisted with fear, small watery eyes pleading, the right hand missing a finger, was unmistakable. Each detail seared itself into Snape's memory like a brand. "Peter? Pettigrew?" Professor McGonagall's cry cut through the room. It was the spark that set Snape off. His voice tore out of him, not words but a roar. He drew his wand in a flash, the tip aimed straight at Pettigrew, who hunched on the desk. Snape's black eyes were rimmed with red, burning with a hatred that had been burning in him for 12 years. 12 years of rage, of cursing Sirius Black for Lily's death, pouring every ounce of pain and bitterness into a single man. And now the truth struck him like a poisoned blade. The real traitor, the one who betrayed the Potters and caused Lily to die, had been here all along, a coward living like a rat for 12 years. He had hated the wrong man. Avada. The green light was beginning to form at the tip of Snape's wand, his face contorted with killing intent. "Stupefy! Expelliarmus!" Dumbledore and McGonagall acted at once. Their spells collided with Snape's between him and Pettigrew. His wrist went numb, his wand nearly jerked from his hand. He tried to force the curse, but something gentle and immovable blocked him. "Severus, calm down," Dumbledore called sharply. "Calm down?" Snape turned, eyes blazing like a wounded beast. His chest heaved. "You tell me to calm down? This traitor, he killed Lily. He let Black be accused for 12 years, and all this time I hated the wrong man." Spittle flecked his lips as he shouted. Regret and fury crashed through him so hard he could barely breathe. He paced like a caged animal in the office, wand creaking in his hand, as if he would tear the place apart. "I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill him right now. This filthy rat, he doesn't deserve to live." He lunged repeatedly toward the desk, desperate to seize the culprit and strangle him. Dumbledore and McGonagall met him with wards and barriers, holding him back. Pettigrew had folded in on himself, head buried in his arms, trembling so violently he seemed all bones and fear. He whimpered in indistinct rat-like sounds, utterly terrified. Jason stood to one side, watching. Snape's hatred and anguish were no longer theoretical. They were raw and overwhelming. The force of Snape's reaction, the way his long-held belief had been destroyed in an instant, only underscored how damning Pettigrew's betrayal was. Dumbledore's face was grave, calm like still water. He understood better than most how deep Snape's feelings for Lily had been and how devastating this revelation must be. But he could not allow Snape's rage to decide Pettigrew's fate. "Severus," he said again, voice firm but weary, "I know you are in pain, but Peter Pettigrew cannot die yet." "Why not?" Snape snapped, searching Dumbledore's face for any sign of conspiracy. Hatred flared at the old man's interference. The idea of a chance for immediate revenge being stolen from him made the pain worse. "Because he must live to stand trial by the Ministry," Dumbledore answered. "We need him to confess what he did that night, to clear Sirius Black's name. Only then can justice be done, and Lily and James can truly rest." McGonagall stepped forward, speaking with weighty reason. "Albus is right, Severus. We need a living witness. Think of Lily. She would not want the real murderer to go unpunished, nor an innocent man to suffer forever for a crime he did not commit." At the mention of Lily, Snape's fury wavered, replaced by an even deeper pain. He closed his eyes, veins standing out on his throat, his hands trembling around his wand. The office felt close and suffocating. His anger was a volcano forced down, ready to erupt. Pettigrew's life balanced on a knife edge. Somewhere far away, in Azkaban, Sirius Black, wrongfully accused and imprisoned for 12 years, might finally have a chance at vindication. The possibility hung over Hogwarts like a thick, impenetrable fog, heavy with consequences no one could yet measure. In the hush of the headmaster's office, Snape's pain lingered like a physical thing. The idea, Sirius Black might be innocent, hit him like a bucket of ice water. Sirius innocent? The two words churned a storm inside him more violent than the shock of discovering Peter's true form. 12 years of hatred had eaten into him like rot into bone. It had run in his veins and become part of him. He had loathed Black, his recklessness, his flamboyance, the fact that he had once been Lily's friend and, in Snape's mind, had caused her death. And now that entire conviction was being ripped away. The real traitor, cowardly, despicable, rat-like Peter Pettigrew, sat curled on the floor, alive. Sirius, meanwhile, had been rotting in Azkaban, punished for a crime he didn't commit. If Lily had known, what would she have thought? Snape's heart was a tangle of guilt for Lily, of fury at the waste of his hatred, of shame for having been wrong for so long. He could not tell whether the tumult in his chest was the hunger for revenge on Lily's behalf, or bitter self-mockery for hating the wrong man. As his thoughts spiraled, a cool voice at his shoulder cut through the chaos. "Professor, don't you want to see Sirius Black come out of Azkaban before you take your revenge? If you kill him now, it's over." Jason emphasized the word revenge, the implication unmistakable. Then, with a flick, he sent a bundle of objects sliding from the desk to the floor. The suggestion hit Snape like lightning. Yes, killing Peter Pettigrew would be easy. Obliviate, or more certainly, Avada Kedavra could end the creature. But then what? Sirius would remain the villain in the public eye. The Ministry's story would stand. Snape would still have hated the wrong man for 12 years. No, that would not suffice. The murderous glint in Snape's eyes did not fade. It cooled and sharpened like tempered steel. The blind rage that had demanded Pettigrew's immediate annihilation changed into a more complex obsession. He wanted Pettigrew destroyed, not merely killed. He wanted to see Sirius walk free and watch the truth unspool. He did not yet know what would follow, only that he had to witness it himself. Snape's defenses broke. He squeezed his eyes shut until the world went dark. When he opened them, there was only hard resolve. He strode to the fireplace, grabbed a handful of flue powder, and without sparing a glance for Dumbledore or McGonagall, threw it into the flames. Green fire roared up. "Ministry of Magic! Cornelius Fudge's office!" he barked, then thrust his head into the blaze. The flames licked his face. He seemed not to notice. A moment later, his voice boomed back from the fireplace, full of barely contained fury, and carried through Fudge's office hearth. "Fudge! Cornelius Fudge! Get to the Hogwarts headmaster's office at once. At once. I have something of immense importance to tell you. If you do not want your name and charges of dereliction of duty to be on the front page of the Daily Prophet tomorrow, you will come here now. He withdrew his head. The green flame died down to smoke. Snape's chest heaved. He was plainly enraged. The headmaster's office felt stranger than ever. Dumbledore's face showed understanding. McGonagall looked from Snape to the trembling heap of a man on the floor. The fireplace burst green again, and a short, portly figure in striped pajamas and a rumpled black cloak stumbled out, hair a mess and sleep still on his face. Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic, nearly fell to the hearthrug. Merlin's beard! Snape! This had better be earth-shattering! Fudge complained, brushing soot from his pajamas. I've just changed into bedclothes. His voice trailed off as he took in the scene. Dumbledore and McGonagall, that perpetually gloomy potions master, a young wizard he did not know, and on the floor, a man curled up like a rat. What's going on? Fudge's ruddy nose twitched. Confusion replaced irritation. He tried to laugh it off. Dumbledore, are we having a Halloween gathering? The date seems a little off. Snape snorted, arms folded, clearly scornful of small talk. Dumbledore's face grew grave. Cornelius, I'm afraid we have discovered some unsettling truths tonight. He indicated Peter Pettigrew. You may wish to reacquaint yourself with this person. This is Peter Pettigrew, supposedly murdered by Sirius Black 12 years ago. What? Fudge's eyes goggled. Peter Pettigrew? Dumbledore, are you having me on? He was blown to bits. Black tore him apart. All that was left was a finger. He looked at his own hand, as if to reassure himself his little finger still existed. Dumbledore continued, motioning to Jason to pass a slim silver pamphlet across the desk. The fact is, Pettigrew is not dead. He is an animagus, and has spent the past 12 years disguised as a rat. He cut off a finger to make it appear he had been murdered and to frame Black. Dumbledore's voice was steady as he handed Fudge the pamphlet describing the Eye of Truth. He explained, concisely and without flourish, how the artifact worked and how they had used it to force Scabbers to reveal his true form. Fudge read, aghast, as the impossible story unfolded and the room's terrible truth settled over them all.